In March of 1994, a woman in Dayton, Ohio picked up a roll of film from the local pharmacy, 42 photographs from her son's birthday party. Nothing more. Photograph 31 stopped her cold. It showed her living room, empty, taken by accident when the camera fired inside her purse. No people, no guests, just a couch, a lamp, and a window. And standing in the corner of that empty room, a boy she had never seen before, looking directly into the lens, smiling. She would spend the next 11 years trying to find out who he was. She never did, but she wasn't the only one who saw him. Between 1994 and 1996, at least 19 separate households across 11 different states developed rolls of film containing a photograph none of them remembered taking. A photograph of an empty room or an empty hallway or an empty backyard with one detail in common. A boy, roughly 10 years old, always alone, always smiling, always looking directly at the camera, as though he knew exactly when the shutter would fall. None of these families knew each other. None of them lived near one another. And when investigators eventually compared the photographs side by side years later, they found something that should have been impossible. It was the same boy, same face, same smile, same slightly tilted angle of his head. In every single photograph across 2 years and 11 states, he had not aged a single day. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why a private research firm spent nearly 3 years quietly buying up every one of those photographs, and why, in 1997, that firm's entire file on the case vanished from a federal records request, replaced with a single typed note that read, "Subject inactive. Do not reopen." Nobody has explained what that means. Until now, nobody's tried. This is the story of what's become known, in the small circle of researchers and archivists who've spent decades chasing it, as the Smiling Boy case, one of the strangest, least publicized visual anomalies of the 1990s, and one that never made it onto mainstream television, largely because so much of the physical evidence was quietly acquired and never returned. What you're about to hear is pieced together from surviving photographs, one recovered home video, newspaper archives from 4 different states, and the partial notes of a freelance journalist who spent 2 years investigating the pattern before disappearing from public life entirely in the fall of 1996. I want to be upfront about something before we go further. This case has never been definitively proven, and I'll be clear throughout about what's documented versus what remains theory. But the documented part alone, the photographs that do exist, the timeline that does check out, the paper trail that does lead to a dead end in 1997, is strange enough on its own that I don't think it needs exaggeration. Let's start at the beginning with the woman in Dayton and the photograph that started all of it. Her name, according to the surviving local newspaper clipping from May 1994, was Carolyn Stein, a 36-year-old bookkeeper, recently divorced, living alone with her 9-year-old son in a modest rental house on the east side of Dayton. The photograph in question was never supposed to exist. Carol had brought her camera to her son's birthday party that March, and somewhere in the chaos of the afternoon, the camera had ended up back in her purse without being turned off. A common enough mistake with the point-and-shoot models of that era, prone to firing off an accidental frame or two if bumped the right way inside a bag. When she picked up the developed roll from the pharmacy 2 days later, frame 31 was exactly what she expected from an accidental shot. Dark, slightly angled, clearly taken from inside her purse as she'd walked through her own living room. The couch, the lamp, the window with its half-drawn curtain, and the boy standing in the corner, between the window and the bookshelf, looking directly into a lens he had no way of knowing was pointed at him from inside a closed purse. Carol's statement to the local paper, given a few months later after the story had quietly spread through her neighborhood, was consistent every time she gave it. There had been no boy in her house that day. Her son's birthday party had ended hours earlier. Every guest had left. She had locked the front door herself before walking through that exact room with her camera still running in her bag. She initially assumed it was some kind of double exposure, a common issue with film cameras of that era, where an earlier undeveloped frame bleeds through onto a new one. She took the photograph back to the pharmacy. The technician who developed it told her, according to her own account, that a double exposure doesn't typically produce a fully resolved, sharply focused human figure standing in correct proportion to the room around him. Whatever was in that photograph, he said, had been in front of the lens when it fired. Carol didn't push the story publicly. She showed the photograph to a few neighbors, mentioned it once to a local reporter working on an unrelated piece about a string of minor break-ins in her area, and otherwise tried to move past it. She has said, in the only interview she ever gave on record, that what unsettled her most wasn't the impossibility of the image, it was the boy's expression. He wasn't scared, she said. He wasn't confused, like he'd wandered into the wrong house. He looked like he was exactly where he meant to be, and he looked happy about it. She kept the photograph for the rest of that year. In early 1995, she reported it stolen from a locked drawer in her bedroom, the only item taken in what appeared, by all other evidence, to be a completely unrelated home burglary that same week. No one was ever arrested. No copy of the photograph survives today except through a black and white reproduction printed in a small regional newspaper in June of 1994, grainy, but clear enough to make out the shape of a boy and the unmistakable curve of a smile. That reproduction is the only physical trace left of the very first documented sighting. It would not be the last. For nearly a year after Carol and Stein's photograph appeared in that Dayton newspaper, nothing connected it to anything else. It was a strange local story, the kind that gets filed away as an oddity and forgotten within a season. That changed in the spring of 1995, when a photography student in Lubbock, Texas named Daniel Reyes noticed something while working a summer job at a 1-hour photo lab. Daniel's job was straightforward: process customer film, review the prints for quality control, and flag anything that came out damaged or defective before handing it back. It was tedious, repetitive work. Thousands of frames a week, mostly birthdays, vacations, and family gatherings, the kind of images that blur together after enough exposure to them. But then one frame stopped him. It was from a customer's vacation roll, a woman named Linda Ferris, photographing her family's back porch on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. Frame 19 showed the porch, empty, apparently taken by accident between posed shots. And standing at the edge of the frame, half in shadow, was a boy, smiling, facing the camera directly, in a yard that, according to Linda Ferris's later statement, had been completely empty when she'd taken that photograph. What made Daniel pause wasn't the anomaly itself. It was the fact that he recognized the boy's face. He'd seen it before, 6 weeks earlier, in a completely different customer's role. A family from a neighboring town photographing a backyard barbecue with one accidental frame showing an empty section of yard and the same boy, same expression, same slight tilt of the head, standing at the tree line. Two unconnected families. Two unconnected rolls of film. The exact same face. Daniel did something that, in hindsight, is the single reason this case has any surviving documentation at all. He kept both prints, made photocopies of each for his own records, and began quietly asking around the lab whether any of his coworkers had processed anything similar. Within 2 months, he'd identified 4 more instances, all from that same regional photo lab chain, all involving customers who had no connection to one another beyond having their film developed at branches of the same company across a 3-state radius. However, Daniel wasn't a journalist and he wasn't a researcher. He was a 20-year-old college student working a summer job, and he had no idea what to do with what he'd found, until he made a phone call, in July of 1995, to a freelance journalist who'd written a minor regional piece the previous year about unusual complaints filed against photo processing companies. That journalist's name was Rebecca Hollis, and it was Rebecca Hollis's notes, recovered years later, incomplete but extensive, that form the backbone of everything we actually know about this case today. Rebecca Hollis was 31 years old in the summer of 1995, a freelance reporter who'd spent most of her early career covering local government and consumer complaints for regional papers across the Midwest and South. She was not, by any account from people who knew her, someone inclined toward sensationalism. Colleagues who worked with her described her, consistently, as methodical to a fault, the kind of reporter who'd spend 3 weeks fact-checking a single paragraph rather than risk running something unverified. That's precisely why what happened over the following 14 months carries the weight it does. After Daniel Reyes's call, Rebecca requested and received copies of all 6 photographs he'd identified, She cross-referenced the customers' names, addresses, and, where she could obtain them, their personal accounts of the incidents. What she found, within the first month of digging, went well beyond anything Daniel had uncovered on his own. The pattern wasn't limited to that one regional photo lab chain in Texas. Working backward through newspaper archives, consumer complaint records, and, in a few cases, direct interviews with families willing to talk, Rebecca identified 11 additional cases stretching from 1994 through mid-1995. Households in Ohio, Missouri, Tennessee, Georgia, and as far north as Michigan, none of them connected by lab, region, or any obvious shared factor, all reporting the same essential detail: an accidental or unexplained photograph, an empty space that shouldn't have contained anyone, and a boy, the same boy by every visual comparison Rebecca was able to make, smiling directly into the lens. What happened next is where Rebecca's notes become, by her own handwriting, noticeably more careful and more anxious. She began attempting to track the boy's identity through more conventional means: missing persons databases, school photo archives from the surrounding regions, anything that might match his face to an actual name. She found nothing. No missing child report from anywhere in the country across any of the years she checked matched his description closely enough to be confident. But then, sorting the photographs chronologically by the date each family reported taking them, Rebecca noticed something that, according to a colleague she confided in at the time, visibly unsettled her in a way the rest of the investigation hadn't. The boy did not appear to be aging. Comparing the earliest confirmed photograph from Carolyn Stein's roll in March 1994 against the most recent one she'd obtained from a family in Georgia in September 1995, a gap of 18 months, his face showed no measurable difference. Same proportions, same expression, down to a small detail she flagged specifically in her notes: an identical faint scar above his left eyebrow, present and unchanged in both images. Children change in 18 months, she wrote in an entry dated October 1995. Even a little. This one hasn't changed at all. It's at this point in the timeline that the case takes its strangest and most difficult to verify turn. The part that transforms this from an unusual visual anomaly into something closer to a genuine conspiracy, in the fullest sense of the word. In November of 1995, according to Rebecca's notes, she was contacted directly by a representative of a private research and consulting firm. She recorded the name in her notebook only as Meridian Analytics, a company that, when she attempted to research it independently, appeared to have no public records, no listed address beyond a post office box in Virginia, and no identifiable clients. The representative, whom Rebecca never identified by name in her surviving notes, offered to purchase, at what she described as a genuinely absurd amount of money for a few blurry photographs, every physical print and negative connected to the case that she'd managed to collect. She refused the first offer. According to her notes, the amount doubled within a week, unprompted, without her having made any counteroffer or further contact. This is, understandably, the detail that has drawn the most skepticism over the years, and I want to be honest about that skepticism rather than smooth over it. Rebecca Hollis's notes are the only surviving record of Meridian Analytics ever existing. No corporate filing under that name has been located in any state registry. It's entirely possible, and some researchers who've reviewed this case believe it's the most likely explanation, that Rebecca either misremembered or deliberately obscured the company's real identity in her own private notes, perhaps out of caution, perhaps because she genuinely didn't know who she was dealing with. What is documented, however, is this: over the following 4 months, at least 7 of the original families connected to this case reported being separately approached, always in person, always by a well-dressed individual identifying only as a collector or a researcher, never leaving a business card or contact information, and offered substantial cash sums for their photographs. Every single family who accepted the offer reported the same detail afterward. Within roughly a month of selling their photograph, they experienced an unrelated theft or break-in at their home, during which nothing else was taken, but any remaining copies, negatives, or physical reproductions of the image were removed. Carolyn Stein's photograph, stolen from a locked drawer in early 1995, fits this exact pattern, even though her theft predates the earliest confirmed contact from any researcher by nearly a year, a discrepancy Rebecca herself flagged in her notes as either evidence of an earlier, undocumented phase of the same operation or simple coincidence. Nobody expected a set of ordinary family photographs to become valuable enough that someone would pay thousands of dollars, and in some cases resort to theft, to make sure they disappeared from public circulation entirely. But that's precisely what happened. For over a year, every piece of evidence in this case had existed as a single static image. A photograph, always accidental, always still. That changed in February of 1996, and it changed everything about how Rebecca Hollis, and everyone who studied this case since, understood what they were actually looking at. A family in Nashville, Tennessee, the Whitfields, had recorded roughly 2 hours of home video footage over the course of a weekend, most of it mundane. A daughter's dance recital, a backyard cookout, a few minutes of a dog chasing a frisbee. Standard 1996 camcorder footage, the kind that ends up in a box in a closet and is never watched again. It was Rebecca, reviewing the tape at the family's invitation after hearing about a strange detail they'd mentioned to a neighbor, who found it roughly 40 minutes into the footage, during a stretch where the camera had apparently been left running, unattended, on a tripod in the backyard while the family ate dinner inside. For nearly 6 unbroken minutes, the yard is empty. Grass, a fence, a swing set, gently moving in the wind. Then, entering from the left edge of the frame, unhurried, the boy walks directly into view. He does not look around the yard. He does not appear to search for anything or anyone. He walks with the specific, unhesitating confidence of someone who knows exactly where a camera is positioned and exactly how long he has before someone comes back outside. He stops in the center of the frame. He looks directly into the lens, not toward the house, not toward anything else in the yard, but directly and precisely at the camera itself, from a distance and angle that would have made it very difficult to know, by sight alone, exactly where the lens was pointed. He smiles, and then, for the first time in any surviving piece of evidence from this entire case, he does something no photograph had ever been able to capture. He speaks. The audio is poor. 1990s camcorder microphones were never designed to pick up clear speech from that distance, and the sound is layered under wind noise and the faint hum of the recording mechanism itself. But Rebecca, and later, a professional audio engineer she consulted, both independently transcribed the same 2 words, spoken slowly, directly toward the microphone. Almost time. He then turns and walks back out of frame, in the same unhurried manner he entered, and does not reappear for the remainder of the tape. The truth was even stranger than the photographs alone had suggested. This wasn't a photographic artifact, a trick of double exposure, or a processing error at a lab. Whatever had been appearing in these images was capable of independent movement, apparent awareness of exactly where it was being recorded, and, for the first and only documented time, speech. Rebecca copied the relevant 6 minutes of footage before returning the original tape to the Whitfield family. That copy, along with her written notes on the audio transcription, forms the single most significant piece of physical evidence connected to this entire case. It is also, as far as any confirmed record shows, the last piece of evidence Rebecca Hollis ever successfully obtained. In April of 1996, roughly 2 months after reviewing the Whitfield footage, Rebecca made what would become her final documented attempt to formally escalate the case. A Freedom of Information Act request filed with a federal agency, asking for any records related to unexplained photographic or video anomalies reported to consumer protection or federal investigative bodies between 1994 and 1996. The request, remarkably, was not rejected outright. It took nearly 8 months to process, well outside the standard federal turnaround time, and when the response finally arrived in December of 1996, it consisted of a single page. Most of the page was redacted, solid black bars covering what had clearly once been several paragraphs of typed text. What remained visible, according to the copy that survives in Rebecca's personal files today, was a partial case reference number, an unredacted date of March 1994, matching precisely the same month as Carolyn Stein's original photograph, and a single, complete typed line at the bottom of the page. Subject inactive. Do not reopen. No further explanation. No named agency contact. No indication of what subject referred to, or who had made the determination that it was inactive, or what reopening it would have involved. Investigators who've reviewed this document since, and it has been independently authenticated, at least in terms of matching the correct federal request response formatting used during that period, have never been able to determine which agency actually processed the request, since the letterhead itself was among the redacted material. It only got worse from there. Rebecca's notes, which up to this point had remained detailed, organized, and methodical, become noticeably sparser after December 1996. Her final dated entry, from early January 1997, reads simply, "Someone knows I have the tape. I need to make copies." She made 2 copies, according to a close friend she confided in around that time. One, she mailed to that friend with instructions not to open it unless she asked for it back or unless she stopped making contact for more than 30 days. Rebecca Hollis stopped making contact on January 19, 1997. Yet this wasn't the end of the story, though for nearly 2 years, it appeared to be exactly that. Rebecca's disappearance was reported by her friend after the 30-day window passed without contact. A missing persons investigation was opened, found remarkably little. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her car remained parked outside. Her bank accounts showed no activity after January 19th. No withdrawals, no purchases, nothing to indicate she had planned a trip or intentionally disappeared on her own terms. The friend who held the mailed copy of the tape did eventually open it well past the 30-day window, and after consulting with a private investigator about how to proceed responsibly. What she found inside was not, as she'd expected, a simple VHS copy of the Whitfield footage. It was the tape, along with a sealed envelope containing Rebecca's complete written notes on the case, the most detailed surviving account of everything covered so far in this video, and a single handwritten page that hadn't been part of Rebecca's earlier documentation at all. That page listed a set of coordinates, a date roughly 6 weeks in the future from when she'd written it, and one additional line, "If this is where they take me, someone needs to know I went looking on purpose." The coordinates, when checked, corresponded to a remote, undeveloped stretch of land in rural Virginia, within roughly 40 miles of the post office box Rebecca had originally associated with Meridian Analytics. No official search of that specific location has ever been publicly confirmed. Rebecca Hollis has never been found. Her case remains, to this day, formally classified as an open missing persons investigation. Investigators later discovered, through a separate and largely unrelated records request filed by her friend years afterward, that the post office box connected to Meridian Analytics had been closed and its records purged in February 1997, 3 weeks after Rebecca's last confirmed contact. For years, the case sat exactly where Rebecca's disappearance left it. A box of photocopied photographs, a 6-minute tape, and a set of coordinates no one had officially followed up on. That changed in 2019, when a small independent archive specializing in unexplained regional phenomena obtained, through channels they've never fully disclosed, a complete digital scan of Rebecca's recovered notes and the tape copy, the same materials her friend had held onto for over 2 decades. It was during the digitization process, running the audio from the 6-minute clip through modern noise reduction software far more sophisticated than anything available in 1996, that a technician isolated something no one had ever been able to hear clearly before. Beneath the boys' 2 spoken words, "almost time," layered so faintly beneath them that 1990s equipment had no chance of separating it from ambient noise, there is a second voice, fainter, further from the microphone, speaking a single additional word, roughly half a second after the boy finishes speaking. The word, according to the archive's own published analysis, resolves clearly enough to be confident of its content, even if its source remains completely unidentified. The word is confirmed. There is one final detail that the archive's analysis surfaced almost as an afterthought, buried in a footnote of their published report, the kind of detail that's easy to miss on a first read and considerably harder to stop thinking about once you notice it. They cross-referenced the exact timestamp of that second voice, the one that says confirmed, against every other known piece of footage or photographic evidence associated with the case. It falls to the second, exactly 2 years after the date recorded on Carolyn Stein's very first photograph in Dayton, Ohio. March of 1994. March of 1996. 2 years to the day between the first confirmed sighting and a second voice confirming something, on tape, that no one has ever explained. No sighting matching this boy's description has been documented since 1996. Whatever the pattern was building toward, if the archive's timestamp is correct, it appears to have concluded exactly when it was scheduled to. We're left, at the end of all this, with a box of photographs no institution will officially acknowledge, a tape with two voices no one can identify, a journalist who vanished chasing an answer, and a single redacted federal document that tells us with total confidence only that something was designated a subject, and that whatever it was, someone with enough authority to redact a federal record decided it should never be reopened. Maybe there's a mundane explanation buried somewhere in this case that none of us have found yet. Maybe Rebecca Hollis is alive somewhere, having simply chosen to disappear for reasons that have nothing to do with any of this. But if the timeline holds, if that second voice really does say what the analysis claims it says, on the exact date it claims it says it, then somewhere in March of 1994 something began. And in March of 1996, on a videotape nobody was supposed to be able to fully hear for another 23 years, something confirmed that it was finished. Whatever that means, no one has been able to find the boy, or whoever spoke the word confirmed, since. If this case is one you want to see followed further, because there's more in Rebecca's recovered notes than I could fit into this video, let me know in the comments, and I'll put together a follow-up covering what the archive found afterward. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, I genuinely appreciate a like. It's the clearest signal that longer, deep dive cases like this are worth continuing to make. And subscribe if you want to be here for the next one, because this isn't the strangest file sitting in that archive. It's just the only one we've been able to fully piece together so far.